Hello, welcome. We hope that everything is going well with you. Shalom, shalom. Peace be upon you. Peace be with you. We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and we have a curiosity on the biblical dietary laws of the Old Testament, the Jewish kosher, what you can eat, what you can't, because people we've come across, Muslims, etc., they said, oh, you shouldn't eat that pork pie, you shouldn't eat that pork sandwich, etc., etc. We've actually talked to a few practicing Jews that give us one depiction of why the Jews don't eat pork, and the Muslims also, which is completely different to what Tacitus in his book of histories says. Okay, the practicing Jews say, well, we don't eat it because it's scriptural, right? Plus the pig rolls around its own muck and eats it, so what a disgusting animal. And whereas Tacitus actually says the supposed Jews or Israelites got ousted out of Egypt because they had swine or pigs, they're pig herders, and these pigs got leprosy, or the Egyptian word for it, bublos or something like that, bublos, which affected the groin. Apparently these Hebrews or Israelites or Jews or whatever that were there had this bublos in their loins, and the oracles told the Egyptian pharaoh or king, get these people out of here, because if that infection spreads, then your people are going to get it, they're going to be infected, then they're going to die. So oust these people. Okay, and the Egyptians didn't like the idea that they had pigs, these Israelites or whatever had pigs running in and out of the house in the same room as them, sleeping, all that sort of stuff in their own house. They didn't like that. They couldn't stand pigs and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so we're curious about what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat according to the biblical scriptures, the Old Testament. What does it say in the New? I know of Peter's vision that he had, that all animals that were, because he was kosher, were made clean by God, and he's commanded to go eat certain animals, but he refused, and with prodding he probably eventually did do what he was told. Go cull, cook and eat these particular animals. Okay, so we're going to have a look. I'm going to skip all the preface, the introduction, everything. Most of it, here's the contents page, most of it's apocalypse of the animals, of nature, all this sort of thing. So we're going to have a look at possibly chapter 5 part 3, analysis of this Ethiopic. Okay, we're going to look at chapter 6, the Kosher Laws, distinguishing clean and unclean creatures, and it's all there, 1 to 5. So we're going to go zip ahead. Okay, I'll go back a bit, we went too far, to 135, where it all starts from, apparently. Okay, we went back a bit too far, page 131. The chapter 6, the Kosher Laws distinguishing clean and unclean creatures. The scriptural regulations, 1 Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, 1 to 20. Before we examine the various theories about the origin and significance of the kosher rules of the Jews, the house of Israel, etc., it is necessary to summarize the contents of the two passages in which the legislation occurs. These are Levitical laws, namely Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14, 1 to 20. There are, of course, extensive parallels between the two texts, which raise the question of whether the priestly text is dependent upon Deuteronomy or vice versa. To discuss this question here would, however, take us off course, so the author would simply cite the remarks of von Rad and give reference to recent secondary literature in footnote 1 in his era, in his lifetime, right? Lists like this were not improvised by the Deuteronomic writer out of his head. On the contrary, he employed catalogues such as were no doubt drawn up by the priests at the sanctuaries. The catalogue in Leviticus 11:1-F is rather fuller, but agrees with our text so closely that both texts seem to go back to one and the same list. And here's a reference. Recommended reference. A. The kosher legislation and holiness. Deuteronomy 14 introduces the food regulations as part of a program in which Israel is urged to act as befits sons of Yahweh. Deuteronomy 14:1. The people are reminded that they are holy to Yahweh. They're chosen. He's to be their holy people and chosen to be a people for his possession out of all of the peoples that are on the face of the earth in that time, right? According to Deuteronomy 14:2. Thus, in Deuteronomy, the kosher rules are correlated with the concepts of holiness and Israel's election as those chosen, right? That holy people. Leviticus 11 begins simply with, say to the people of Israel, these are. However, holiness emerges as the motivation for obedience at the end of the regulations regarding swarming creatures. For I am Yahweh, your God. Consecrate for yourselves therefore and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not defile yourselves with any swarming thing that crawls upon the earth. For I am Yahweh who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Leviticus 11:44-45. So this must be from the Hebrew. In Levi 20:24-26, the same line of thought is extended both to include all the regulations and also the idea that these laws are there to preserve the distinction between Israel and the nations, or the Gentiles, Goyim, non-Jews. I am Yahweh your God. I have separated you from the peoples, the rest of the world, right? You shall therefore make a distinction between the clean beasts and the unclean, and between the unclean bird and the clean. You shall not make yourselves abominable by beast or by bird or by anything with which the ground teems. Okay, that's what's in plenty on the ground, like insects and so forth. Crawlers, which I have set apart for you to hold unclean, or regard as unclean. You shall be holy to me, Yahweh, for I, Yahweh, am holy, and have separated you from the peoples that you should be mine. His selected people, right? Thus, both versions relate the kosher legislations to holiness and to the concept of Israel being set apart from the Gentile nations. However, we need to be aware, as Weinfeld has pointed out, that there may not be identical conceptions of holiness at work in the two texts. A distinction should be made between the holiness code, concept of holiness, and the Deuteronomic one. While the holiness code urges the people to sanctify themselves, make themselves clean themselves, right? Make themselves pure, and to be holy. You shall be holy, Leviticus 19:2, or you shall be holy to me, Yahweh, Leviticus 20:26. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy to me, Leviticus 11:44, and hence not to contaminate themselves with impurity. Deuteronomy reverses the order and urges the people not to contaminate themselves because they are holy to God by virtue of the election of his choosing, right? They're elected by him. Because you are a holy people to Yahweh. 7:6, 14:1-21, and 14:21. And there's a suggested source to look at. If Weinfeld is right, then in Deuteronomy the holiness of the people is already an established fact because God has declared it to be, or decreed it to be. So, it is inherent in the people. However, in Leviticus, while certain things and places such as the sanctuary and its furnishings are inherent holy, Israel herself is not automatically holy but becomes holy through observing the purity legislation. It is also significant, as Houston points out, that in Deuteronomy the word holy is not even used of God himself, which is in marked contrast with the holiness code in Leviticus 11:44-45, where the holiness of Israel is defined by the holiness of Yahweh. These differences should not be overstated to the point that we drive a wedge between the Deuteronomic and the Levitical conceptions of holiness. Indeed, there is at least one passage in Deuteronomy which comes close to the purity legislation of Leviticus 11-15, and which may therefore be regarded as a challenge to Weinfeld's thesis, namely Deuteronomy 23:10-15, EVV 9-14. Here it seems that the holiness of the camp is endangered by the presence either of excrement or of someone who is ritually unclean after a bodily emission. And there are similar implications in the prohibition not to touch the carcasses of the camel, the hare, the rock hyrax, and the pig, Deuteronomy 14:8. Despite these considerations, Weinfeld's distinction is helpful, and therefore Houston is probably right that holiness in Deuteronomy has little to do with the cult, but serves to define Israel over against the rest of humankind. Consequently, this is the boundary that Deuteronomy is concerned both to celebrate and to protect by means of ritual. This is precisely what we would expect in view of Deuteronomy's tendency towards desacralization. On the other hand, the conception of holiness in the priestly writings is intimately tied up with a worldview which not only revolves around the sanctuary and its rituals, but which sees the world in terms of its holiness spectrum, with all its spatial, human, ritual and temporal dimensions. Houston summarizes the spatial aspect as follows. Within the tabernacle there is a gradation of holiness, from the Holy of Holies, or most holy place, where God himself appears above the Ark of the Covenant, through the holy place, or outer chamber of the tabernacle, and the altar, to the court, and so the camp in general. The outer boundary of the camp is as far as the field of holiness extends, and it is appropriate that the leper and the scapegoat should be sent out to it. What's the scapegoat? We all know what a leper is. He got some sort of illness, sickness, skin disease, whatever. So they're usually kept outside the camp. And the scapegoat is usually the sacrificial goat or lamb when a sacrifice is required. It was pre-Christ when Christ became that sacrificial lamb. By his stripes everyone was healed. The shedding of his blood they were forgiven. Okay. So this scapegoat was a unblemished lamb or goat that was required for sacrifice at certain times. For each spatial grade, well, you couldn't really sacrifice a person, could you? House of Israel was, we'll pick that guy, he could be the sacrifice. Okay, none of that Conan the Barbarian stuff. For each spatial grade there is a corresponding group of personnel: high priests, Levites, Israelites, and it is plain from Leviticus 10:11 that it is the task of the priesthood to ensure that the holiness spectrum is recognised, preserved and honoured. No man suffered in the camp for the sins of the house of Israel. Okay, so he wasn't thrown into a volcano or anything like that and sacrificed. You are to distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the clean and the unclean, and you are to teach the people of Israel all the statutes, or the principles, commands, laws, which Yahweh spoke to them through Moses. That this ministry is of vital importance is not to be underestimated. The above directive for the priesthood comes in the context of the deaths of Nadab and Abihu in the sanctuary itself. They had offered unholy fire for Yahweh, Leviticus 10:1. Quite what is meant by, and it's the Hebrew, by the looks of it, is unclear, but the story serves to highlight the fact that danger is present when holiness and uncleanness meet. Those responsible for the final redaction of Leviticus were clearly motivated by a fear of the danger introduced by pollution as much as by a concern to maintain Israel's identity. The defence of the sanctuary was to these editors of paramount importance, as Houston points out. There is one source of holiness, blessing and order, threatened on every side by a great variety of pollutions. It needs to be protected against these threats, especially by warning the Israelites about the dangers of unpurified pollution. To defile the sanctuary by failing to make use of the available means of purification is to risk death. And it would seem that the sanctuary is affected whether the defiled person approaches it or not. Leviticus 15:31. Compare also Numbers 19:13 and 20. Thus, although Yahweh, the Holy One, dwells in the sanctuary, the whole camp partakes of the holiness of the latter. It is therefore apparent that the different settings of the kosher legislation have a bearing upon the significance of their link with holiness. In the Deuteronomic context, the clean are to be eaten and the unclean abominated, so as to make clear the reality that Israel, the chosen of Yahweh, is indeed a holy people. The legislation is tied up with Israel's identity insofar as it provides the opportunity for Israel to demonstrate who she is, the prized possession of Yahweh. On the other hand, in the Levitical version, the correlation with Israel's distinct identity is still present and equally important, but now through meticulous observance of purity, considerations of which the kosher laws are part, Israel must strive for holiness. She must do this to avoid the dangers and reap the blessings of having Yahweh, the Holy One, dwell in her midst, or among them. For the priestly writers, the kosher legislation is as much about order and avoidance of danger as it is about identity. B. Land animals. Each of the three distinct elements in creation, land, water and air, is dealt with in turn, beginning with the land animals. This may imply that legislators worked with something akin to the creation account of Genesis 1:1 to 2:4, something closely related to that in mind. However, M.P. Carroll has questioned whether the latter actually evinces a threefold classification system. Instead, he finds there 5 different kinds of creature, so he's looking to see if there's actually any evidence there of a threefold classification system, creature-wise, creation-wise, land animal-wise. 1. Fish, Genesis 1:26-28. Birds, Genesis 1:20 to 22, 26, 28. 3. Cattle, Genesis 1:24-26. 4. Beasts of the earth, Genesis 1:24 to 26 and 30. 5. Creeping things, Genesis 1:24 to 26 and verse 30. However, in the author's opinion, Carroll overlooks the implications of the well-known parallelism of the priestly creation myth. Just as the fish and the birds are created on day 5, or era 5, to inhabit the two elements, air and lower waters, made on day 2, so the denizens of the land, which comprise Carroll's group 3, 4, 5, are made on day 6 to live on the land. Thus, these are really subgroups of one larger group. Mention should also be made of Houston's view that the kosher legislation of Leviticus 11 works with a 4-fold classification. 1. Beasts. 2. Winged creatures. 3. All life that moves in the water. No technical expression. 4. Teeming things that teem on the earth. They wander around on the earth, gather on the earth, move about. Houston argues that the priestly authors perceived the universe as possessing 4 levels: the sky, the earth, the ground, and the waters under the earth. This cosmology is, according to Houston, to be found in Deuteronomy 4:17-18. However, not only is it difficult to find in the latter a real difference between, and here's the Hebrew here, but Houston's 4th group read more naturally as a subgroup of the land animals, coming as they do in the second half of Leviticus 11, which seems to be an addition made in the interest of greater comprehensiveness or understanding to legislation which was originally more like the version of Deuteronomy in terms of length and scope. Only Deuteronomy begins with a list of 10 clean animals which may be eaten, and then declares the qualifications of the clean animals, whereas Leviticus 11 goes straight into the qualifications. As Carmichael has pointed out, this is an indication that Deuteronomy 14 is earlier than Leviticus 11, because the need to list examples becomes superfluous once a definition has been arrived at. The blanket definition is almost word for word the same in both versions. Here is the English, and here is the Hebrew. Deuteronomy 14:6, compare Leviticus 11:3. And every animal which divides the hoof and cleaves the cleft of both hoofs and chews the cud among animals, that these you shall eat. And it has some references here. And the author follows BDB, who that is. Here, page 828, Milgram translates this Hebrew with that has hoofs, Leviticus 1:16 to 16, paragraph, was it 116? Paragraph 646. Taking, or page 646, taking his cue from Psalm 69, he argues that the hip hill of this particular Hebrew here is denominative. Houston, who agrees with him, Purity, page 36 in 1, points out that this both removes the problem of this Hebrew being tautologous and also solves the difficulty of Leviticus 11:26, and there's more Hebrew there, which is a nonsense with the customary translation. However, since the phrase in the Hebrew is used in Leviticus 11:4 to 6 on its own, Milgram's solution creates as many difficulties as it solves. It would be better to stay with the older view and amend verse 26 in the light of the LXX, the Septuagint, by leading the negative in the Hebrew here in the second phrase. Okay, that might be a bit of a head twister. In scientific terms, this limits the clean land animals to the ruminating bi-hooved members of the order of Artiodactyla, which is not really explained here, but it is on page 50 of that particular book by L.L. Grab, Leviticus 1993, page 50. Both versions then give the same four examples of borderline cases, though in a different order. The camel here, rock, hyrax, whatever that is, and pig, is that like a hyena or something? Not really sure. Deuteronomy 14:7-8, Leviticus 11:4-7. These are regarded as unclean because they do not fulfill both qualifications. Milgram notes of the camel that it has a 3-chambered stomach and it chews the cud. However, its feet have cushion-like soles enveloped in hardened skin, and although each foot is cleft into 2 toes, it has no hoof. The rock, hyrax, and hare are unclean because they do not possess cloven hooves. As noted in chapter 5, the rock, hyrax, was perceived to be a ruminant, even though it does not in fact possess a ruminant stomach. The same is also true of the hare. Finally, the pig is unclean because it is the only non-cud chewing hoof cleaver in the whole of creation. Later in Leviticus 11, there are further qualifications enumerated for land animals which are absent in Deuteronomy 14:1-20. These concern the quadrupeds and swarming creatures. Every creature which walks upon its paws among the beasts which walk upon all fours is unclean to you. And these are unclean to you among the creatures which swarm upon the earth. Leviticus 11:29 in the Hebrew, and Leviticus 11:27 and 29 in Hebrew. A list of the clean swarmers is then given, Leviticus 11:29-30, which, needless to say, are difficult to identify with certainty. Thus, in Table 1 below, along with the Hebrew nouns of the 8 creatures, the author has given the suggestions of BDB and those collated by Milgram from various sources, for example the LXX or Septuagint, the Peshitta, possibly the Eastern Peshitta, Syriac Eastern Peshitta, the Tag Umim, Ibn Ezra, and Rashi in his recent commentary. These are probably 2 well-known, respected rabbis. There is some information here. Milgram, Leviticus 1-16, page 648. Note, Houston argues that the camel does in fact have cloven hooves which are not detectable to superficial observation. Purity, page 38. So M. Douglas, self-evidence, etc. Houston points out that she must mean in the Middle East. Here, what's this one? 15. Here. The only non-cud chewing hoof cleaver in the whole of the Middle East. That's what this M. Douglas is trying to get across. Hebrew, BDB, weasel, milgram is a rat, weasel, mole, mouse, lizard, large lizards, ferret, gecko, ferret, hedgehog, lizard 2, spotted lizard, chameleon, lizard 3, lizard, gecko, salamander, lizard 4, skink, snail, newt, sand lizard, chameleon, white owl, salamander. Is that a fish? Table 1. It is probable that this group of 8 are a category of vermin, which came to be included in the Levitical version because they are likely to be encountered in the house and in the cooking vessel. Apparently, were they? Is it shrimp or lobsters? They don't eat lobsters apparently because they're like the cockroaches of the sea. Apparently, they clean up all the crap that ends up at the bottom of the ocean, right? Or on the ocean bed. The clear implication of Leviticus 11:24-43 as a whole is that among the quadrupeds, the animals which walk upon paws are equated with the swarming things. Verse 42 in particular confirms this. For here those which go upon all fours, those with many feet, and those which go upon the belly are all listed as examples of swarming things. It is also noteworthy that, as with the camel, rock hyrax, hare and pig, the carcasses of these creatures are not to be touched. Leviticus 11:26-31. Compare Leviticus 11:8, Deuteronomy 14:8. Okay, it was just applying to the house of Israel, or the Israelites, okay, at that point. Okay, it's not applying to non-Jews or non-Israelites or goyim or Gentiles. Okay, it's strictly for them, related to them, okay, relative to them. But in the case of the creatures which walk upon paws, the instruction is that they are not to be touched while living. Leviticus 11:26. All of these instructions must have been very impractical, as Houston highlights. There are many occasions in the ordinary course of life when it is necessary to touch and indeed to carry the dead bodies of unclean animals, for example, to bury a dead donkey or to remove a dead mouse from the larder. And that's from Houston's book, Purity, page 39. Denizens of the waters. The two versions are almost the same, except that P prefers the term abomination to unclean. Compare Leviticus 11:10 with Deuteronomy 14:10 and Leviticus 11:20 with Deuteronomy 14:19. Too much should not be read into this preference, since this Hebrew word here occurs frequently in Leviticus 11 as well. It seems to be merely stylistic. The blanket definition for the water creatures is as follows. This you shall eat of all the creatures which are in the water, all those which possess fins and scales you shall eat. There it is in the Hebrew, Deuteronomy 14:9. Neither version give any specific examples of clean or unclean water creatures. D. Creatures of the air. The creatures which move through the sky are subdivided into birds. There's the Hebrew there, and where they can be found in Deuteronomy, Leviticus, and winged insects, Deuteronomy 14:19, Leviticus 11:20. This combination, as is frequently pointed out, is not to our minds natural, but indicates the quite different cosmological framework within which the legislators worked. Birds. Neither version gives a definition for distinguishing the clean bird from the unclean. Deuteronomy 14:11-12a begins with a simple apodictic statement. Every clean bird you may eat, but these birds you may not. And there is in the Hebrew. Just probably talking about the scavengers, those that eat the carcasses of dead animals, etc. On the other hand, Leviticus 11:13 does not even mention that there are clean birds, but launches straight into the negative aspect with stronger language. And these you shall abominate among the birds. They shall not be eaten, but they are an abomination. And there is in Hebrew. Both versions seem given an almost identical list comprising 20 birds which are enumerated in Table 2 below. Houston does not even try to translate the nouns in his recent monograph. The author has elected to follow the suggestions of BDB, but would refer to the reader both to G.R. Driver's articles, Birds in the Old Testament 1, is it? Birds in Law, in PEQ 87, 1955, paragraph 5 to 20, and to Houston's helpful table, which places the Hebrew nouns in columns alongside the LWX or the Septuagint, the Vulgate, the RSV, driver's identification, and also that of Dillman Houston, purity, paragraph 44 to 45, and there it is there. Just have a look at that again. Okay, so these are all the negatives. The ones you shouldn't eat. These are all the ones you can eat. Hang on. It's got, if this, Leviticus 11:13 does not even mention that there are clean birds, but launches straight into the negative aspect with stronger language. So here is okay, these are subdivided into birds. Okay, these are birds, obviously, different kinds of birds, and perhaps these are the ones you're not, as the house of Israel or Israelite, you weren't allowed to eat at that time. Okay. This is identifying, and this is like the ones you can't eat. You weren't allowed to eat. It's forbidden. Unclean birds, maybe. Okay, looks pretty much the same. The identification of the, in the Hebrew, as ibis and as the pelican are especially problematic because they are associated with the deserted ruin and the wilderness, which is, as Houston points out, is a typical behaviour for water birds. Finally, it should be noted that the LWX or Septuagint textual tradition of the list of birds is in a confused state. Of the 20 birds, only 9 are in the same order as in both Leviticus and Deuteronomy. However, it is hard to say. Okay, down here it's got the Masoretic text, is it? Reads here is in the Hebrew. Driver notes that the doublet seer is probably a textual error due perhaps to the falcon's well-known acuity of vision. Yeah, like great eyesight, right? Can see a mouse at 1,000 yards or something like that, running across the desert, whatever, right? Birds in the Old Testament, page 11, note 32. There is a variolect in support of the above emendation. V. Ken, CBHS, as well as regional support. SP reads, here's the Hebrew after this. Perhaps Deuteronomy originally had the same order as Leviticus. Okay. Winged insects. Here is the most significant difference between Deuteronomy 14 and Leviticus 11. The text in Deuteronomy reads as follows: every winged insect is unclean to you. They may not be eaten, but every clean bird you may eat. Okay, so you weren't allowed, as the house of Israel, to eat dragonflies, mosquitoes, anything that flew, right? At that point. This appears to prohibit or unallow the consumption of winged swarming things altogether. S.R. Driver notes that, in the Hebrew here, are flying things, generally not birds only, and therefore that is possible that verse 20 gives permission to eat clean winged insects as well as clean birds. But if this Hebrew word includes winged insects, then it nullifies the prohibition in verse 19. Thus it is better to see verse 20 as a repetition of verse 11, which serves to mark the end of the legislation dealing with denizens of the air. The priestly version is more extended and quite different. Every winged insect which walks on 4 legs is an abomination to you. Okay, so don't eat the cockroach and so forth. Thus, instead of all winged insects being unclean, in P is only those which have 4 feet, which are unclean. Earlier we noted that P equates the 4-legged land animals which walk upon their paws with the swarming things upon land, Leviticus 11, 27, 29, 42. So there is a consistency when the same writer legislates that winged insects with 4 legs are also unclean. There are, however, exceptions. But this you may eat from all winged insects which walk upon 4 legs, those which possess bending legs. So probably the cricket, the grasshopper, the locust, maybe. Okay, and there's the Hebrew. Above their feet, so as to hop with them upon the earth. These you may eat, so you can eat the grasshopper. Anything that hops, that's an insect. And for examples of such creatures are given, which are again difficult to identify with certainty. Here's the Hebrew. BDB, locust, 1, 2, 3, grasshopper, milgram, locust of every kind, board, locust, cricket, grasshopper. So that was what John the Baptist fed on, apparently. Locusts and honey or something like that. Thus, Leviticus 11 bears witness to a shift from a comprehensive ban upon insects, as in Deuteronomy 14, to a qualified inclusion of locusts and related insects. This is probably an accommodation of the fact that these were commonly eaten and consequently could not be declared unclean. But it does allow us insight into the possible rationale of the writers who perceived insects, like the locust, as somehow different from the other swarming creatures because they possess the ability to hop on 2 of the 4 legs. 1, 2. The sacrificial system and the kosher rules. In addition to being prohibited for human consumption, the unclean, or not allowed, the unclean animals and birds were prohibited, or not allowed as offerings and sacrifice to Yahweh. For the Yahwist, all clean animals and birds were eligible for sacrifice, Genesis 8:20. However, in Leviticus 1:7, the itinerary is narrowed down to the domesticated clean land animals, the pigeon and the dove, Leviticus 1:14, 5 and 5:11. Genesis 15:10, which is an account mostly from the Yahwist of a covenant which God makes with Abraham, perhaps reflects the move towards the picture painted in Leviticus, because here Yahweh requests a heifer, a she-goat, a ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. In respect of the denizens of the waters, there are no references to the sacrifice of the fish. This may reflect the Israelites' lack of familiarity with fish. Indeed, nowhere in the Old Testament is a single species of fish named. So, Milgram, Leviticus 1-16, page 666. E. Firmage, The Biblical Dietary Laws and Concept of Holiness, in J. A. Emerton edition, Studies in the Pentateuch, etc. Ike Rod has suggested that the Israelite sacrifice ultimately derives from the conception of feeding the deity. Although this is not the only notion involved in the Old Testament regarding sacrifice, there are unmistakable traces of it in the language and ritual of sacrifice. Not only are the materials of sacrifice edible, but occasionally the sacrifice is described as, in the Hebrew, the bread of God, the idea of the offering as, Hebrew again, 29, Genesis 8:21, etc. A savour of pacification is also a part of the same world of ideas. Scholars normally understand these terms as old formulae which were preserved in the cult but were no longer taken seriously. Eicherot contends that the whole tenor of ancient Israel's belief in Yahweh is irreconcilable with the idea that God is fed by sacrifice, bound up as this is with God's dependence upon man. 31. Eicherot, Theology of the Old Testament, 1, page 142. But even if most Israelites did not believe that Yahweh needed sacrifice, the thrust of the argument in Psalms 50:12-13 is pointless. Indeed, one of the patriarchal stories depicts Yahweh as sharing a meal with Abraham, Genesis 18:1-8. It is also quite another matter to deny that they believed that Yahweh took pleasure from the sacrifices in some way or other, which was akin to feeding. Thus, the author would suggest that the fact that only the clean animals and birds were acceptable in the sacrificial system is no accident. Yahweh limits himself to the same food as Israel. There's a note here. 32. This is of course at the heart of Firmage's explanation of the kosher legislation, the biblical dietary law, paragraph 177 2:8. He, however, argues that the logic is the other way. Israel limits itself to Yahweh's food. Okay, so see his discussion. Distinctions are also made between the clean creatures, or the firstborn of the creatures in the people's possession were to be offered in sacrifice to Yahweh. Exodus 13:2, 15, 22, 29, 30, and so forth. The firstborn of unclean animals, which could not be sacrificed, had to be redeemed with a lamb or with money. Exodus 13, and so on. Similarly, as the sacrifice of human beings was prohibited or not allowed, Leviticus 21-3, etc., they too had to be redeemed. There's also a tradition in Numbers 3:11-13 that the Levites were consecrated to Yahweh in the place of the firstborn of the people. The latter provides a parallel between Israel and the clean animals, in both of which one group is specially set apart for Yahweh or God. Finally, there was legislation governing the quality of the animals which could be offered, Leviticus 1:3, and so forth. Physical perfection was required, as is especially spelled out in Leviticus 22:17-25. It is again significant that very similar regulations applied to the priests who offered the sacrifices, Leviticus 21:16-21. So that would be the Levite priest, right? The priest. 1:3 summary. Our study of the two versions of the regulations has led to the following conclusions. 1. Both versions of the legislation are rooted in the concepts of holiness and have strong associations with Israel as the holy people of Yahweh or God. However, in the Deuteronomic context, the legislation provides the opportunity for Israel to demonstrate who she is, the prized possession, here it is in the Hebrew, of Yahweh. With respect to the Levitical version, the Kosher Laws are part and parcel of Israel's struggle for holiness, which is concomitant with having Yahweh dwell in her midst in the sanctuary. It's part of the method so that he will dwell amongst those people. The legislation is here as much about order and avoidance of danger as it is about identity. 2. Cloven hooved, cud chewing land animals may be eaten and sacrificed. In later Levitical legislation, only the domesticated clean animals were sacrificed. As with Israel, all the firstborn are Yahweh's. The quadrupeds which walk upon paws are conjoined with the swarming things, as are the swarming things with many legs or no legs. Water creatures with fins and scales may be eaten. Certain birds may not be eaten, no reason is given. Clean birds may be both eaten and sacrificed. Through in later strata of the Pentateuch, only the dove and the pigeon were sacrificed. Certain birds, like the scavenger, etc., that feed on corpses, be it animal or human, were said not to be eaten. Okay? Scavengers, ravagers, they're the clean-up crew. Right? Flying insects are unclean, but in Leviticus 11, those which can hop on two legs are clean, like a locust, a cricket, a grasshopper. Yahweh limits his food to clean animals and birds. Only physically perfect animals could be sacrificed, just as only physically perfect priests could serve in the cult. See Milgram's comparison of the criteria, Leviticus 1-16, paragraph 722-23. 3. Explanations of the Kosher Rules. The rationale behind the kosher legislation has perplexed both modern and ancient interpreters. 3 explanations have, however, been put forward which warrant our immediate attention. 2. 1. The Cultic Explanation. This view is especially associated with the German scholar Martin Noth. His starting point is the notion that the content of the Old Testament law codes, which stem from the pre-exilic period, was directed towards the exclusiveness of the connection between God and his people, that is, with the particular aim of protecting the sacred regulation of the 12-tribe confederacy. This overriding purpose included the kosher rules. The animals declared unclean are not rejected on hygienic grounds, but because they are animals which were revered or sacrificed in various cults in the areas occupied by Israelite tribes. Consequently, they were forbidden for cultic slaughter and even for food, because every possible connection with foreign cults was to be avoided. So, if they're in the land of Canaan, they didn't do what the Canaanites did, right? Noah's explanation is especially appealing in view of the link noted earlier between the kosher rules and the concepts of holiness and Israel's election. It has verses there, Deuteronomy 14:21 and so forth, and especially 20:24-26. Noah develops his thesis by concentrating upon the pig or wild boar and attempts to demonstrate the sacred use of the animal in Phoenicia. He claims that in the Ras Shemra text, the wild boar was sacred to Baal. However, this is to go beyond the evidence. In CTA 5 verse 8-9, the animal was merely an inoffensive title for members of Baal's entourage. Nowhere do the texts speak of a cultic role for the pig. Archaeological evidence, however, from the ancient site of Tirzah, modern Tel El Farah, where pig bones have been found in a subterranean sanctuary, does show that the pig was sacrificed in pre-Israelite Canaan. According to DeVoe, this sanctuary was in use from around 1800 to 1600 BCE. Similar evidence was also found in a cave near Giza, which was employed for cultic purposes in the Old and Middle Bronze Age periods. Further confirmation of this picture has been adduced by Hubner from recent archaeological work at various sites such as Samaria, Ta'anak, Kinneret and Hazor from the Bronze Age down to Iron Age Israel, in which bones of domestic pigs are found without a break. In comparison with the remains of sheep, goats and cattle, they are present on a smaller scale, but the fact that the pig was eaten is perhaps an indication that it was also sacrificed. The author shall return to the significance of these archaeological discoveries below. Noth also points to Isaiah 66:3-4:17 for evidence of illegal cultic practices involving the pig amongst members of the post-exilic community. Here he is on more firm and yet equally controversial ground, because the interpretation of this passage and other related texts in 3rd Isaiah is complex. Is that Isaiah 3? Indeed, it is not beyond possibility that Hansen is right to see in them polemic directed against the newly re-established cultus in Jerusalem, rather than a reference to actual sacrificial activities. Noth also casts his net further afield, assembling data regarding Syrian cults from later Greek authors from both the Hellenistic and Roman periods. He deduces that in Phoenicia there was an association of swine with cults of the great mother goddess. Another unclean creature which has been associated with Canaanite cultic practice is, and it's got the Hebrew here, one of the lizards in Leviticus 11:30. Jerku relates the Hebrew noun to the Akkadian, no idea how to say that, let's just say Hulmutu, and the Syrian Hulmata. The latter appears in Ugaritica 587, number 11, in a context which indicates that's the language, right? Of the Ugarit, the Ugarite language, in a context which indicates that this animal played the role of a small deity, was a small god. Thus Jerku concludes. Okay, here's some sources. 40. Okay, he's saying Hansen, Dawn, paragraph 146 to 47, 179-80. Note, Houston sees here the evidence for an exilic cult of the dead in his book Purity, paragraph 165-68, and so forth. If therefore the Humit, I don't know what the heck that word is, played, we just say helmet because there's no E there, so it wouldn't be helmet, so we just say helmet, played the role of a small deity in the Canaanite cult, then we know that it was for this reason that the animal with this name in Leviticus 11:29f was considered unclean. There are, however, serious difficulties in sustaining the cultic explanation of the kosher rules. In the first place, it is not certain that the evidence with respect to the pig is as well disposed to Noph's position as he maintained. DeVoe, in fact, came to completely different conclusions. Always and everywhere, the conclusion is that the sacred use of the pig remains rare and was reserved for particular cults or for inferior forms of religion. Like Noth, DeVoe also based his judgment on evidence from a number of cultures. In the case of Mesopotamia, he not only refers us to an Assyrian fable in which it is said that the pig is an abomination to the gods, but also to the special role of the pig in incantations against demons, in particular against the demon Lamashtu, the enemy of pregnant women. Similarly, among the Hittites, he finds that the sacrifice of the pig was exceptional, being confined to incantations to ward off epidemics, sterility, impotence, and so forth. DeVoe also points out that in one version of the Egyptian Seth-Horus cycle, Seth transforms himself into a black pig. When we bear in mind that Seth has a similar role in Egyptian myth to that of the Hebrew Leviathan, that's the great sea beast, giant sea beast, which couldn't be killed, etc., etc., we may have covered in a previous video we uploaded, and the Babylonian Tiamat, the significance of this is obvious. DeVoe also draws attention to the chthonic nature of the ritual use of the pig in the Greek cult of Demeter, in which piglets were cast into pits, and there is in the Greek, for the underground divinities. Tracing the difficult noun back to the Semitic Me'ara or cave, he suggests that there may be an ancient oriental link between the Greek cult and the subterranean sanctuaries at Gezer and Tel el-Farah. Whether this connection can be made or not, the fact that these ancient sanctuaries are subterranean indicates that they were used for secret rites rather than ordinary sacrificial purposes. Finally, DeVoe shows that the ancient written evidence is ambiguous. On the one hand, Porphyry, who originated in Tyre, said that the Phoenicians neither ate nor sacrificed the pig. De Efston 1:14. Maybe I'm not too sure what that is. Maybe it's like Deuteronomy abstination or something. Right? Not sure on that. At the opposite extreme, Herodian, who wrote a little before Porphyry, said that Phoenician law defended the sacrifice of the pig. Herodian 5:6-9. The implication is that there were different attitudes among the Phoenicians. There were those who sacrificed the animal in the Aphrodite Astarte cult, as John of Lydia and Antiphanes bear witness, but there were others who abominated the cultic use of the animal. This is precisely what Lucian of Samosta declared. They, you see, the Syrians sacrificed bulls and cows and sheep. Only swine they neither sacrifice nor eat, because they consider them accursed. But other men do not consider them accursed, but holy. Dear Syria 54. It is suspected that this was the case in earlier times among the Phoenicians. Houston, who is critical of DeVoe's method of appealing to such a wide range of material in the Eastern Mediterranean, nonetheless endorses his conclusions, drawing upon recent archaeological work from a wide range of Palestinian sites, both domestic and cultic. These indicate that Hubner's interpretation, which was mentioned earlier, is mistaken. Of particular significance for this study are the Bronze Age cultic sites, Lachish 6, Lachish Fossa Temple, Nahalia, and Shiloh. According to Houston's, not one of these offers any evidence for the sacrifice of pigs in the faunal material. The cumulative effect of this evidence means that we cannot accept Noph's line of argument regarding the pig. In declining to eat and sacrifice the animal, Israelites shared a widespread abhorrence of it. As in neighbouring countries, there would have been groups that appeased the non-eating of it or something, or non-sacrificing. The underworld deities. Okay, so they used it to appease the underworld deities with sacrifices of the pig, or appease the gods of the underground with sacrifices of pigs. Such practices may have survived in the exilic period, as 3rd Isaiah, or Isaiah 3, attests, and contributed to the hardening of attitudes concerning the pig. But this acted as a reinforcement of the taboo rather than the original reason for it. A second and more serious objection to the cultic explanation is the simple observation that many of the clean animals, such as the bull, the sheep, and the goat, were sacrificed in other cultures. Indeed, one wonders why the bull was not prohibited or was unallowed, especially in the light of both its associations with the worship of Baal and its deification in the Egyptian cult of Apis and Menevus. Noth attempts to overcome this difficulty by arguing that these beasts represent such widely distributed materials of sacrifice that they had no special links with any cult. But this leaves us confused. Why should Israel at one moment act like a sponge and absorb foreign influence, and then at another repel foreign influence altogether? So we are thinking, while we are reading this, that is why Christ sent the demons from that maniac, or that lunatic, who said, "We are legion, we are many." He told those demons to get out of that man, and he sent them into the pigs, a herd of pigs that were close by, which upset the herder, the owner, right? And then they jumped off the cliff to their deaths. Okay? Because upon request, these demons said, "Oh no, don't send us back to the pit. Send us into those pigs over there." Okay? So he cast them out and put them in the pigs. Okay? Because of what that said earlier. Because pigs were often used or sacrificed to appease the gods of the underworld deities. Yeah? And then pigs falling off the cliff is a sacrifice. Could be why he did it. It could be related, right? Okay. And why